My guest today is Paul Clarke. Paul has held senior communications, marketing, and brand leadership roles at some of the world's most influential professional services organizations, including McKinsey, Arthur Andersen, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and Paul Hastings. Over the course of his career, he's helped those global organizations navigate major transformations, high-stakes crises, and some of the most challenging reputational moments in corporate history. He has a unique background and experience, splitting time and his persona between the UK and the US, and even becoming a partner in a hotel in upstate New York that reminded me of Schitt's Creek. I met Paul when we worked with him at Tequity to help us with our core positioning and branding, and I knew he would be a great Zero to Prove guest. In this conversation, we talk about the power of relationships, why some of the best career opportunities come through trust rather than planning, and how curiosity has guided many of the most important decisions in his life. We also get into leadership, navigating crises, the lessons he's learned from working inside some of the most iconic global brands, and what ultimately led him to leave the corporate world to build something of his own. Please welcome Paul Clarke.
Well, born in London, I already had a fundamental change at the age of 11 when my parents decided to send my brother and I to Barbados, where we lived as teenagers with my Barbados. They decided that they wanted us to experience a little bit of the Barbados culture, and the education system is really good there. So from an early age, having that experience of massive change from sort of uprooting from London to Barbados, emigrating, and then emigrating back to the UK to go to university. So change has always been a part. I think it's probably a part of a lot of lives of people, especially if they're children of immigrants or immigrants. So being used to taking a risk and taking a challenge is part of the DNA to a certain extent. I think I studied aeronautical engineering at Queen Mary and the University of London. A lot of people are always surprised with that because my work is in brand and marketing strategy, but I actually started off as an I do have
You're an engineer.
engineering. Yes, that's right. Which kind of helped us in a sense. People used to wonder why, as a marketing or communications person, but actually I do look at, even when I'm writing, I look at a sentence as actually elements of an equation, and depending on the order of the various elements, you want to sort of produce a definite outcome. So that's always been part of. Although I would say that now with the event of AI and everyone using it, it's come full circle, and I'm now grateful for having that background, because it becomes very useful when trying to apply AI to marketing, brand, and communication. But yeah, I did aeronautical engineering. Part of it, most of it in London, but because Europe had an exchange program, I did do a year of it in France so that was the third country sort of having lived in. But as I graduated, I decided that engineering wasn't going to be right for me. To be honest, I had been interested in doing journalism, and so I did a postgraduate sort of diploma in radio production and news, just to try my hand at that. And I got a job in a completely different direction. And that was working for an organization at the time called the Committee of Vice Chancellors and Principals of the Universities of the United Kingdom. Sort of worked on creating higher education policy and lobbying for higher education. And I ended up in a job as in the public relations and parliamentary office of the CVCP. So my first major job, having started there as an assistant, was as a spokesperson for higher education in the United Kingdom. And so that took me that's sort of how I ended up on a path towards general communications and marketing and brand. And at the time, it was a pivotal point in the history of higher education. One, I love the breadth of it, because universities, institutions, they often think about it from a perspective of just being the sciences or the humanities, but many of the art galleries, many of the museums, many of the great cultural institutions are actually part of the university. So I ended up having to lobby, represent, present the case for funding for from education to the arts, and so the breadth of it was great. But at the time, it was a period where the universities had decided that higher education in the UK had been free, and and they decided that could no longer be the case, and this is when they were introducing tuition fees. So it's a
Mhm.
point where some people will say it was the ending of free education, free higher education in the United Kingdom, and I found myself as the spokesperson for the
Oh,
universities,
great.
or one was having to advocate. Yes, my friends in the pub quite often used to say, "Tell them who you work for." Um, However, I do actually understand the rationale, so I did definitely drink the Kool-Aid, as some would say, and I can still to this date, several decades later, explain the rationale as to why universities went down that route. It was absolutely necessary, but it wasn't necessarily popular. So that's where I
Well,
sort of
but before you jump off of that, that is a very valuable skill set. Um, and I'm guessing it served pretty well foundationally for the work that you did later, because it's very easy to just, in particular, in a world of social media, just, if you will, repeat the pop, whatever is popular and whatever is, trendy is the wrong word, but to, at that age, to basically have to become adept at, not just defending those policies, but understanding them. You didn't lose integrity, as you said. You can explain the logic. You understood the logic, even though. So it let you it let you learn how to take a strong position, probably in the face of opposition, which will, I'm guessing, will turn out to be valuable later.
yes, so much opposition that I even had steel capped reinforced shoes for some of the conferences because of student demonstrations and so forth. But the reality is that, it was one of those things. If you scaled higher education universities compared to health in the schools and so forth, they came further down on the list, and so therefore public funding was always a priority for those secondary education. So it made sense that naturally that universities had to try and get some source of income from some alternative area. So it wasn't a popular decision. Still, to many, still not a popular decision, but I do believe it was the right one for higher education. So, and that's several decades
And there
later.
you are. Yeah.
You know. But it did, and I think the other thing I would say about that time is that because the stakes were high, my appreciation of quality and so the standards that were set, look, quite often the private sector stereotype the public sector as not necessarily having the same levels of standards, but actually certain disciplines that I learned and I carry all the way today were set during that time because the stakes were so high. So that was another factor of working in the public sector. And that led me to joining Arthur Andersen. So then that was a huge, big pivot because I spent 6 years working in public sector, and I joined Arthur Andersen, and I remember thinking to myself, well, I remember one interview question as a young person. They were saying, well, at the time, Andersen Worldwide was the biggest
Yeah.
brand out in the professional services firm, and I always can tell the age in the audience when I talk about Andersen Consulting and saying they became Accenture, and some people did not know that Accenture was Andersen Consulting, etc. But they asked me, you're going to be working with some of the brightest people in the country. Um, how do you think you're going to be able to cope with that? And the day before, I'd had a press release, and I'd had the Vice Chancellor of Oxford and the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge reviewing the press release I drafted. And so I said,
Yeah.
I'm used to working with people who consider themselves the brightest in the world. So I think I will be okay. So the standards were set were great.
But
Anderson was,
that's another thing,
yeah,
though. At an early age, the job you were in gave you an opportunity to be in the room with um, people who you otherwise would not be. What you
absolutely.
just described, and that ended up for you being a theme later. But but being able to be around very, very powerful and influential and smart people, um, taught you, I'm sure taught you a lot, but it also had to build a certain degree of confidence that, in your
Most
ability to
definitely.
speak your mind. Yeah.
Yes, and also you mentioned having sponsorship. So that's the first time I'd also got sponsored, and I still have a good. I mean, I just had just 2 weeks ago a lunch with the person who employed me in the PR team, who's now moved to France, and there are two people in particular, the head of PR and the head of parliamentary affairs, and I learned a great deal from them, to which I'm grateful, and that was something that I was able to take through to Arthur Andersen. Plus, also because of the nature of the issue regarding the introduction of tuition fees, I'd become exposed also to dealing with what they call tier one media. So dealing with the national newspapers, the international newspapers, the
Yeah.
Financial Times, and so forth. So at an early age, I'd already had exposure to dealing with media in that regard, which then Arthur Andersen decided would be a valuable experience to bring to them. So that's how I ended up in the private sector, and that was the beginning of me moving into professional services, which is the area that I've tended to specialize and focus.
Yeah. So when you look at that, you ended up in a place where you found that you were able to represent important issues, important positions, and be, if you will, in the room, both, as you said, with tier one media and powerful people. What was it about that? Um, what is it about that you found satisfying? So you were at Arthur Andersen for a while, but so what 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 did you take away from that? What did you learn? What were the, because a lot of this is, what were the foundations along the way? Because if we work backwards from the Paul that I
Mm.
know now, who is part owner of a motel in upstate New York, splits his time between New York and London. You worked your way into very significant roles in that theme, of telling, storytelling, marketing, storytelling, and building credibility. So what is it about what about that craft that, because I think most people don't probably understand it very well.
Yeah, so if I take Anderson Worldwide was a great foundation because at the time it was such a strong brand in its sector, and understanding a brand being beyond just what some people think of as visual identity, but really treating at it and thinking about it in terms of the promise that you're making to your stakeholders, both externally and internally. And so Anderson ceased trading because of Enron, and I can talk about that
Yeah.
as well because that was also a
But yeah,
huge.
that the
Yeah,
crisis moments are worth talking about too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But and it's interesting. I'll go back to that because I was thinking about it because the alumni network from the brand is so strong that you could still get people who have gone their various different ways, and just because of that Anderson connection, because of the promise that the firm had made to its people as well as to its clients,
Mhm.
we're willing to get together and spend time together because we still share that common bond. Um, I was at Anderson for about 6 years, and I sort of dealt with two big issues during the time, as well as sort of uh, proactive public relations and marketing. But one was the separation of Arthur Andersen and Andersen Consulting. And so they had gone into a huge legal battle over the Andersen name. Hence why Andersen Consulting eventually became Accenture because Arthur Andersen got awarded the rights to the name. However, I think Andersen Consulting are quite grateful once
Yeah.
N1 happened. But I was dealing with that, and of course, I was promoted to UK head of PR at Arthur Andersen 1 week before that Enron story really kicked international news, and so I think I there were a couple of lessons that I learned there. One, I remember it was just before Christmas. We were going to breaking for the holidays, and I was talking to a journalist from The Economist who said, "Oh, we don't think Anderson will survive." And I remember sharing this with some of my colleagues and the leaders at the time. And again, this is a brand that was the largest, and the thinking, well, that's just impossible. And 6 months later, the entire visual identity had been removed from the building that I was working in, and I was suddenly Deloitte. So it was an example. So it was definitely an example of the need to build brand equity, because in moments of crisis, having some brand equity and some trust is very important. The other thing I learned and this is thinking about the UK chairman at the time, because was the power of leadership. And so I think so quite often our metal is tested during times of moments like that. And we joke about, when I had the little Anderson reunion, we joke about it now, because then Anderson, chairman for the UK, we laugh that decades later he could call us and say, "Hey, I'm starting up a venture. Would you come?" And like that,
To go in.
we would all go.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So, just so most people probably won't know the story, but as you said, just a moment to talk about fragility of companies, and brands. So, Anderson, Arthur Anderson was the premier, the premier CPA tax firm, had a consulting business, which, as you described, they spun off, and um, because of the decisions that some of the partners made in relationship to Enron. I think it was Enron and WorldCom, and I mean they happened to be the auditor of a number of companies that turned out to be, um, you know, big examples of white of fraud. And as the auditor, they didn't catch them, and so, as you said, the company disappeared. A name that had been around for 100 years. I don't know how long Anderson
Yeah,
had been around a very, very long time. And that loss of trust, those decisions, managed to destroy a brand overnight.
yeah. I mean, I should say, because there are now some former Andersons have restarted a version of Anderson, so there is some that. Well, it's interesting because most of the clients that Anderson in the end got broken up. Different parts of Anderson in different countries went to different competitors.
Different places,
Then
yeah.
yeah, so in the UK we went to Deloitte, or we joined the people of Anderson joined Deloitte.
Joined, yeah,
In France
exactly.
with EY.
Anderson itself ended. It's
Yeah,
like where,
yeah,
the people
yeah.
left. Yeah.
But it's also interesting in terms of the brand, because most of the clients that Anderson had did go with them to the new firms.
Yeah.
So
Well,
quite often, yeah,
but the trust was in the people.
the
And
trust
they
was in the
didn't
people.
go
Absolutely, this is
the
it.
yeah.
Yes.
And you talked about something there. You were part of a team in an organization, and you talk about, you get a phone call that says, "Hey, I'm gonna launch something. Come join." But when you have the grace to be able to be part of a team that operates at that level, you experience things in a different way than if you were, a junior CPA firm, in Manchester. It's not the same thing. And as you said, the bond that happens between people, the team, the people, that wasn't just the leaders, but it was the rest of those people, left a mark on you. I've had the benefit of working for three, massive major global brands, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. And it's that same thing. There's a camaraderie there. I'm part of a Facebook group of, Apple of the first 10 years. And so all the
Right.
people are
Yes.
still, yeah, there's a camaraderie that comes out of it. And, that I think becomes very important. Like I said,
Yeah, and some
foundationally.
of my long-term friends were built during that time, and so even though
Yeah.
we've gone to different organizations, we still maintain the friendship. And I think also going through a crisis together would
Yep.
definitely reinforce that. So that leads to the period I was at Deloitte, and so I became joint head of PR for Deloitte in the UK, and I shared that with the then existing head of PR. So we decided for Deloitte. So we decided that we would share the role as I was coming from Andersen, and I was very grateful to her and the Grace. So that was another person because I loved working with her. She's now at PwC, head of partner in charge of corporate affairs, and I then pivoted because Deloitte then had a moment when it was going to separate its consulting arm, and then decided not to do that, and so reincorporated it back into the wider Deloitte organization. So I then had to pivot internally from going from PR to then becoming the marketing leader for Deloitte, the consulting arm of Deloitte. So that's where I sort of, because a lot of people in the sort of brand marketing, communications, PR world, they tend to have their specialism.
Yeah.
So they've done PR, they've done marketing, or they do brand. And I've one of the things that my career has allowed me to do is go across the breadth of those various disciplines. So however, I stayed there not as long as I had intended to. And where I made my biggest pivot, which was to move out of professional services into financial services, where I left to join the Prudential. This is the UK Prudential arm.
Yeah.
Um, and I did that, and that was a deliberate choice because the role was internal communications, which, to be honest, as an external
Yeah.
marketing communicator, I thought.
What? Why did you? What was the motivation?
So at the time, the Pru was going through a 3-year transformation, and I had former Anderson colleagues who were there, and
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were moving from. It was yeah, what was it? It was something like a. I'm trying to remember the phrase, but it was a 3-year transformation. At the time, it was the largest transformation of a financial services company because they were going from a direct sales force of about 26,000 to a more remote. This is when we were starting to move to call centers overseas
Mhm.
or within. So it was a complete change. And what they described to me was that this was going to be a living MBA of a transformation of a financial services company. And I thought that's the type of experience I wanted, and I mean, it did become a great case study. They wrote it up in Harvard Business Review. So it became I learned a huge amount of time of not just about my own discipline around communications and marketing, but just
Mhm.
in terms of business itself. And one of the things that I found with internal communications during that period was that you worked hand side by side with the leadership team. You were, as opposed to the marketing and the external public relations people. So again, I was in the meetings with with the CFO and so understanding the business decisions which were taking place, impacting the future of the organization. So I that was a deliberate pivot on mine to do something which actually was to many a step down in terms of role, but it gave me a much greater, broader range of experiences that I thought would be useful if I eventually wanted to become a chief marketing officer, for example.
Yeah. Which you did. So what do you think it was about you that made you successful in that role? So you had to take a certain amount of career risk, as you said, to change firms and to change roles. But why from their side? Why Paul? What do you think it was about you? Because in all these situations, you're describing them from, obviously from your perspective, but from the other side, they're putting you in important roles. So there has to be something about Paul. What do you think there is about you that leads people to bet on you in the way that they have?
So I think one is the expertise and the love and the passion for the discipline, and I suppose also that discipline that I talked about from that I gained from that working for the vice chancellors. I think
Mm-hmm.
that comes across of actually I'm going to be very focused and for high stakes situations, especially when there was like for Prudential transformation. They wanted somebody that wasn't only going to be good technically, but was also going to be very focused on delivering the best result. And so that was something of importance. I think also in an environment like that, personality also has an element to play.
Yeah.
And this is something that, to be honest, I have struggled with sometimes because it's been um, a blessing and a curse sometimes as an amiable, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So I use this as some people might be familiar. There are different various forms of psychometric testing, and one of the
Mm-hmm.
words that I liked was had like driver, amiable, and I think
Yeah.
thinker
Yeah.
and expressive. And when I joined EY, the then chairman told me I was an amiable. Um, and up until that point, I didn't know whether that was a blessing or a curse because during the collapse of Andersen, I had started looking for new opportunities because you kind of thought, okay, I need to find something else. And there were a couple of very, very big roles at multinational organizations, a couple in one in Holland. And I remember I was told that they thought I was too nice for the
Yeah.
role.
Mm-hmm.
And so becoming aware of the fact that I come across as too nice and
Yeah.
was something that I thought, oh gosh, this is going to be a a curse. However, understanding the amiable thing, one of the benefits of that is that I'm good at listening and observing and taking note of people's behaviors. Now, maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
because they sound amiable, so you want to flex and respond to how people are, what they're saying
Yeah.
and what they're doing in order for them to like you. But from a communications and a marketing perspective, that makes me able to capture sort of insights that leaders, especially ones that are drivers, might struggle to pick up themselves. So, just to jump ahead, so one of the strong influences in terms of my leadership development was when I joined EY, and so the chairman of EY, who I won't, if people could look him up, the UK chairman, who was a tough, tough cookie, but in terms of the way he challenged me, um,
Mm-hmm.
I grew. I think that was in the space of time where I really was forced to accelerate. And one of the things I realized with him is that I also became, as well as director of communications for EY globally, I also became sort of chief of staff for the UK. This is at the time. Ultimately, I became the global communications and engagement leader. But at that time, I used to organize the board meeting with that chief of staff role and the
Mm-hmm.
agenda, well, the scorecard process for the whole firm, etc. And after the meetings, we would have discussions regarding how the meeting went and how people responded in the room. And I realized, actually, to be fair, Steve said it, it's because he was such a driver that he
Yeah.
actually valued that I was different from him in that respect. So I would be seeing things, and he was someone who valued different perspectives. He didn't just so he wanted to know what I had seen and what I had observed because I was more of an amiable in his eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's you ended up in partners in a firm called the Listening People. So which
That's
is
right. Yeah.
yeah, which is how I when I met you. So not an accident, but it is um as you said, nice doesn't have to be weak. And
Absolutely.
amiable
Yeah.
doesn't mean weak. It is it actually it lets you engage with people. I mean, if you look at the breadth of things you've done, if you didn't have that ability to engage with people, you wouldn't be where you are. You're
Yeah,
able
and
to
if I can,
translate that way. Yeah.
I was having a conversation with one of the chairmen at a time that I reported to, who was another, as many are, ultimate driver.
Yeah.
and he was worried about his flexibility scores. So his his ability to flex his personal style to match that up with others. He was thinking about it, and he said something once, and that was, I can, as a leader, I can tell people to do things and they'll do it, but that's because I've told them to do it. While a lot of amiable leaders, people want to do it because, and I
Right.
go back to the Anderson chair that I was thinking about, and I suspect he was an amiable leader, which is, as a result of it, decades later, we would still go and join any venture or any project that he'd started. So I've realized that that's actually a strength. I think the other area is also keeping calm in a crisis. So I've had to deal with quite a few of them. So when I joined organizations like the Pru or the others which were dealing with such a high stake issues, because of that early baptismal fire, as you mentioned, with the universities dealing with high stake issues, I think that's one of the things that the experiences that I bring to the table that companies quite often say, oh, actually, we want someone who's going to be quite steady, which can also backfire. So again, you have to learn to to balance certain qualities out, I
Yeah,
think.
you do, but I think you also have been in the room and you've seen the interplay, at that high level. You've worked in a number of world-class firms. I mean, you look at, Andersen and Deloitte, Prudential, Ernst and Young, then you went to McKinsey. And so a little bit about that, and then, and then the moments where you decided um you didn't want to be part of a big global company anymore. But before that, so what led you to McKinsey? And also at some point you started splitting your time when you were at Paul Hastings. So all these things. When did you start if you will, recreating the global part of you? Because you talked about going to school in Barbados and then re-emigrating. You talked about living in France, and then eventually you ended up, split between New York. So what led you, to those decisions?
So McKinsey is a good point of
Yeah.
this. So there are two things that I mean, I loved working at McKinsey. I've actually loved working at all the firms I've been, but I truly did love working there as well. And there are one, the international nature of the firm. It didn't matter where you were located. A lot of the people I reported to, yes, I reported to, when I had a UK role, I reported to the UK office chair at the time. This is or office manager. They don't say chair. Um, but at the same time, when I moved to global, my direct person I reported to was in Atlanta, and another person was in Madrid. So suddenly, having to uh, deal with different time zones and experiences, and also the cultural nuances dealing between them. I'm not saying that the other firms weren't, of course, global, and Anderson was global as well, but I think maybe because of the seniority by the time I'd got into McKinsey, the global nature of the firms became much more important. And then I had to deal with
How did
another.
what led you to, well, if I can, what led you to McKinsey? I never asked you that before. I mean, so
Right.
you went. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so did they recruit you, or did
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
How did that happen? Okay.
They approached me, and so I had been at Prudential now for about 4.5 years, and interestingly, they wanted someone who had as well as broad communications, had a strong understanding of internal engagement, because they spend a huge amount of time in professional services firm. In terms of your brand, a large part of the impact of your brand is, of course, your people. Could have a 70 to 80% impact. And so, again, that decision I've made and the experience I've got in terms of internal communications, and also of a large financial services company, made me put me in McKinsey's direction, which was great. I don't know if necessarily if I would have if I had applied direct from EY, whether I would necessarily had been on their radar, but who knows? But I
Yeah.
was truly grateful for that. And then towards the end of I moved into the global external relations team at McKinsey, and then we had to deal with the galleon scandal. So at the time, the a partner of McKinsey had pleaded guilty or confessed to giving inside information about Goldman Sachs. And then the SEC indicted a former chairman of McKinsey, for who was on the board of Goldman for a similar reason. So that was the biggest scandal at the time, and I got brought in as the core team to New York, where I was based in New York, pretty much there, and occasionally coming back just to wash my linen in London, and then back to New York for a good period of about 8 months. And so that's when I sort of spending a lot more time in New York. So that's really where I sort of got my grounding for international at McKinsey, because I'd actually been physically working in the States. And again, dealing with a big
Yeah.
reputational risk issue, which is sort of potentially existential, according to. And again, I think there was a great lesson there, because I know, given recent coverage that the firm has had over the last couple of years for various reasons, internally, it is actually a great firm to work for, and there is a lot of time spent um, thinking about its values. I don't know if they still have it, I have to check, but they have a value state where everyone in the organization spends time on a certain element of the firm's values, discussing it, exploring what it means in various formats and so forth. And that element I absolutely loved as well about the firm. But that sort of
So,
shaped my international outlook.
so what's interesting is you've had the opportunity to be part of global well-known brands in services firms, and given the personality type that you have, you've also you get to see the strengths and weaknesses of those different things, and so how did you take those things? Where was the moments where you decided, because all of those were full-time roles, and at some point you decided, to go on the path that you are now, which was to go independent with the foundation that you had of being part of these, teams and global brands. What what led you to follow the path you're on now? What were some of the moments where you chose led you to choose differently? Because you could have kept in a big company, big brand role, period. You could have stayed.
Yeah. I think three factors. First one would be the pandemic.
Okay.
So I'm based in New York at the time, and working remotely and so forth. And two things happened to me there. I had been in New York for a number of years, but I think during the pandemic, New York really became home. Not just because I was trapped there, but because I got to really appreciate New Yorkers. So I regard myself as New York and London as being home, as opposed to London being just home. Um, but at that point, I kind of thought, okay, I, the same reason I had joined Paul Hastings was the same reason why I wanted to try something different. So when I left EY, I was the global engagement leader, and I was talking to the chair of Paul Hastings, and it was an old Andersen contact who was the chief business development officer at Paul Hastings, who first approached me, and it took me a year to make the call. And in a nutshell, I remember the chair at the time said, um, um, "What you're doing at EY is great, but EY is a super tanker, and well, I'm sure what you do is valuable, but in terms of the impact you would have on changing any direction or course that super tanker takes is going to be limited, and we're like a luxury yacht."
Yeah.
uh, and so
Yeah.
we would, and so you've worked for all of these global, And as a brand marketing person, when you've worked for a brand, lots of gigantic global brands that have been established before, you do wonder, well, what could I do with
Right.
with an with an organization which is smaller. I wouldn't say that Paul Hastings is small from a law firm perspective, but from a compared to the big
Yeah.
four firms, the McKinsey, etc. So that was the reason I had eventually joined McKinsey. That, and also because we were sponsored. I mean Paul Hastings. That, and because Paul Hastings was doing a sponsored conference with the Financial Times. And I remember they had the former president of Mexico on the panel, and they were asking him what were the three things that South America needed in order to develop and further. And he said, number one, rule of law; number two, rule of law; number three, rule of law. So I was then got bought in. Oh, I must start working in law.
A law firm. I need to go to a law firm. Yeah.
It worked. So after 8 years at Paul Hastings, I decided that actually it's time now to even try work. So my a former EY colleague, Helen, who you know, thought, would you potentially want to come and join my partnership? And that's how I ended up with at the Listening People. And it was really, it's a bit like because now you get to a certain point where you think almost every other day, am I doing the right thing? This is crazy. I had coffee with this guy, completely different. He was media. He was the Guardian Group and controller, and he had been in various ventures himself. And he just said, look, you just try it. Given the strength of your resume, CV, try this route. If it doesn't work out, it's not like you wouldn't be able to find a job. So see if this is something, and that's what I decided to do. I've always wanted to try and stretch myself and do something like doing the internal communications, etc. It's okay. Will I enjoy this, and will I be successful at now being an entrepreneur and having my own venture and building my own brand? And so that was the ultimate driver. It's a bit like, I mean,
you're not a luxury yacht. Now you're
now, yes, I'm a luxury
you're a
dinghy.
small, yeah, you're a little dingy, but that's there was something about the shift to um not working for anyone. I mean, sorry, you're always working for someone because you're
Yeah,
working for your clients, but
yeah,
not working for someone else. And you're dancing without a safety net when you're on your own. And so what was it how did the curiosity to do that, how do you balance that with, people say curiosity versus don't, once you've reached enough success, I found in these discussions, it doesn't mean you're done. It doesn't mean
yes,
that you won't go back if someone, if some opportunity, the guy from Anderson, 25 years ago, doesn't mean you won't go back, but you'll go back um, because something grabs you. You'll go back because the mission grabs
absolutely.
you. Yeah.
I'm not going back because I have to pay the mortgage or
Right.
anything like that. I'm going back because the opportunity it goes back to, I went to Prudential not because of the salary, not because of the role, but because of what they were going through at the time, the value I thought I could bring, and the value I would get
Yeah.
from being part of that huge change transformation project. So I'll never say never. What I like about this new iteration, because now
Yeah.
having sort of now set up on my own, I'm focused on creating a different model, which is much more having a connection of strategic partnerships between, both on the US and the UK in various disciplines, from AI to synthetic personas, etc. And I love
Interesting.
that I can explore all of that, which I wouldn't necessarily be able to do if I was working in house. And I
Yeah.
was thinking about it but if, say, in 2 years' time, I decided to go in house, the experience that I've been gaining working for a variety of clients, I think would enhance any role that I take. But at the moment, I'm exploring. One of the things I loved when I was at EY was the chief of staff role. I loved understanding the business planning, looking at the scorecard, setting the scorecard, looking at strategic opportunities, hearing the various board members present on this, and I was responsible for across the deck and who was on the agenda, deciding what was going on, and for the scorecard process. I truly miss that the business element of that. Not saying that the marketing and the communications isn't the business, but the actual business operations and management side. So having the opportunity now to set up strategic partnerships. For many years, I've done marketing about strategic partnerships and alliances, and now I'm setting up strategic partnerships and alliances for myself, and that's what I'm enjoying doing. And if I could take that and if I and grow that both on both sides of the pond, because I do consider myself transatlantic, and so I mean, and so I'll move back to the US, grow there, move back. But keep going between. I'm blessed to be able to move between two fantastic cities, which a lot of people aren't able
and
to do.
and two very different cultures. And so how did you end up owning a motel?
So I should explain also that my role's changed now, and so I'm an investor, but I've transitioned from partner to investor because I'm so remote now, building on my own, that we changed the relationship. But so the motel is about 100 miles north of Manhattan, in beautiful Catskill region, and I saw in one of your previous interviews you talked about Woodstock. It's in the place where Woodstock took place, so it has a connection to history as well. And this motel, which had been set up in the 50s, in fact, I think it was originally a lodge. It had then got closed for a number of another series of years, so it was derelict in the middle of a small, in the middle of this, just outside this hamlet called Narrowsburg. And they were driving around, and they approached me and they said, what would you think about going into becoming a joint owner with us, as a full partner? And I hadn't seen Schitt's Creek at the time. And
I'm still not sure which character you are, but
yeah.
yeah.
So my friends will know me as definitely my friends stereotype me as being a city boy, and to such an extent that even in London they don't think I know outside of central London, and in Manhattan it would be I just know Manhattan and that's it. So there was an element of this would be the last thing that my friends and family would expect me to get. Fine, but yeah, it was a stretch for me personally, and I knew it was going to. And I thought, gosh, no one in London. In fact, my family and friends in London thought I'd been kidnapped by some cult. And also the notion of a boutique motel. At first in London, I just kept being asked, "You mean like the Bates Motel?" So I had to keep explaining to them. So
no, go watch Schitt's Creek.
But I learned a lot during that experience as well.
There's a theme that you approach these things. As you described, you're calm, you're level, and you're curious. You're every one of those things you did. You made a decision to learn, and just listening to you, the anchor is people. Every single thing you describe, every choice you made was anchored by the people. Someone that you knew, or someone that you had a history with, or someone that you would want to work for. So they were people driven choices. And I think it's so clear with you, but it turns out that I think that people who have reached a place of I would call it personal satisfaction, and professional satisfaction, it's always anchored with people. The risks that you took, you didn't take those risks alone. You described the hotel. It was everything you said, plus a deeper opportunity to work with those people. The Paul Hastings choice, all those. So, because again, in these discussions, I'm looking for anchors for people, and so many people, in my experience, not look at relationships transactionally. What can this person do for me?
I
What
love
can
your
I get?
synthesis. I mean, I thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't got I'm interested in people, the relationship. That's a big driver for me. I mean, I was even thinking about some of the things that I've loved about being involved in a boutique 50s motel. Um, and again, not just the people who are involved, but the people I've met and the people I've known. It's the people, it's the opportunity to meet different people and build relationships with different people, and maintain those relationships going forward that I've always loved. So thank you. That's a great. I will have to now change my resume and say I'm all about the people.
No, but I mean that's a great that is a great that's a great lesson for other people from you. You've described everything you've done in the context of people in relationships and and blending, and your ability to build. I mean, and you're in a role that's related to that, because brand is about relationship. You described that early on. It's successful brands build a relationship with people, and so that it makes it perfect for you. Because that's what very well. I mean, you've made a number of choices, but that North Star and that anchor um, has been learning, testing new things and testing yourself, which is you weren't the thing. I want to pick up with what you said there, because it's another foundational thing for you, which I found has also resonated with me, is you're able to blend different country cultures. You talked about, I mean, you had Barbados as an anchor, you talked about France, and we've talked about that, but I mean, you've developed part of you still likes to go to France, and then balancing, UK and the US, which are very different. And that's, in the world we live in, the ability to absorb, make yourself multi-country, multicultural, as opposed to, because as you said, there's very big differences in between how cultures, experience the world. And so that whether it was intentional or not, has turned out to also be pretty foundational. But it helps you understand how to speak, and especially for the work you do, how to communicate in those different environments, that in a global world. Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Paul. It's it's always a pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of Zero to Prove. You can find more info about our mission and bio and backstories on our guests at zerotoprove.org. If you enjoyed Zero to Prove, please follow us or subscribe, give us a nice rating, and if you are so moved, please write a review. This helps us show more people what is possible when you decide to live life on your own terms. Until then, I'm Anthony Bay, and this has been another episode of Zero to Prove. Take care.